I've recently been playing with a phone that many call one of the best of all time. Even though it released almost 7 years ago, I really didn't think much of it. This is a device that packs in a great many of the old and new features in a package that might just be one of the nicest feeling that I've ever tried. I am of course talking about Samsung's Galaxy S9 and in particular the regular 9, not the Plus. Because I review a lot of bigger phones on Android Police, I'm completely and constantly using phablet sized devices, rarely get to check out anything this small, this manageable. I recently covered the S10e, which might be one of the best ever form factors, but the S9 takes this a little bit further if you ask me. The bezels are generally smaller, I love the curved sides, the fingerprint scanner is better placed, it still had that weird 3D touch thing going on at the bottom of the display, on the home button, and it took what Samsung had already built in the S8 and superbly refined it. See, on the surface the S9 has a few very solid features, but it goes deeper than the inclusion of the now illustrious 3.5mm headphone port or microSD card expansion slot. It also had the aforementioned force sensitive home button, which quite frankly served to do, well, basically nothing. And alongside that excellent capacitive fingerprint reader on the back, it also has iris scanning up front to unlock the screen, which very few devices had, and it was way more secure than the photo-based systems that you'd find in a lot of its lesser devices at the time. It also had, and this is kind of crazy, an SpO2 and heart rate monitor on the back of the phone. This had actually been there since the Galaxy S5 if I remember correctly, which just seems so strange. But yeah, it also had a variable aperture camera for allowing different amounts of light into the sensor. By the way, if you fancy liking and subscribing, that would be a massive help. Cheers. The S9 was never cheap and sat in the high-end smartphone tier alongside the likes of the iPhone XS and the Huawei P and Mate line, and you could argue that it was overbuilt because all these years later, it feels just as high-end and as premium as when it first came out. It's a breath of fresh air to use these days, thanks to a few select physical aspects. It's way smaller in footprint, which makes it easier to hold and use. It's lighter than almost any phone you'll find in store today due to the smaller batteries and smaller camera setups. And thanks to that diminutive clicker, there's also, well, basically no camera bump to speak of, which helps majorly ergonomically in getting it in and out of your pocket. There's a current trend sweeping across the smartphone market of making phones with flat sides, which is something, I'll be honest, I just cannot get on board with. Sure, it worked when phones were the size of an iPhone 5S, but with phones that have like 6.5-inch displays, it just does not help ergonomically. And even the smaller phones like the S9, the curves just help it feel so much better. The OnePlus 12, which is a very big phone with its curved sides, feels way better than stuff with flat sides like the S24 Ultra or the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Perhaps the Pixel 9 and the 9 Pro are the better feeling flat-sided phones out there, mostly because they're a bit smaller, but they also pale in comparison to the way the Galaxy S9 feels in the hand. You can pick these up on eBay for around $100 or £100, and that's where I bought this one. I really should be sponsored by eBay because, well, basically everything you can see behind me, I bought from eBay. There's no affiliation, I don't even have affiliate links. I'm sure there are other sites in your country you could use, but I've always used eBay because of its incredible buyer protection. Though I would say, if you're going to buy one of these as your main phone, don't. I wouldn't go much earlier than the likes of the Pixel 6 Pro because of software compatibility and security issues that could cause quite a few headaches, especially with like banking apps and stuff. So I wouldn't be willing to put up with those headaches, and I wouldn't recommend you buy one of these as your main smartphone. Unless all you were really doing were taking photos, calling people and texting people, because beyond that, it's just a little bit limited these days. That said, it is quite a fun thing to play about with, and I know people who have only just moved on from an S9 and S9 Plus. Strangely, quite a high volume of these people have gone to a Pixel 8 base model, which was recently on sale here in the UK for like 50% off, which is kind of crazy. And also there was some ridiculously cheap, like single-digit pound per month contract deals going on, which I wasn't sure how they made profit on those, but they existed. But that seemed to be the logical successor to the S9, the base model Pixel 8, which is kind of strange if you ask me, but I mean, it was a good phone, so fair enough. The S9 even has modern creature comforts like Qi wireless charging, USB-C, a wonderful OLED display, though at 60Hz it's certainly starting to feel its age compared to the likes of the 120+ Hz displays we have on even mid-ranges these days, but it's still a really nice looking panel, and you probably expect that given it's a Samsung. I thought it would be fun to go out and just take a load of photos with this thing. Of course it only has that 1x camera, so when you zoom in you are really cropping in on the already not very high resolution sensor. And there's no option to pinch out either to get sort of ultra wide shots. But that's part and parcel of using an older phone like this. We only ever had one camera on the back of many smartphones. Funnily enough, the sensor behind this main shooter is about the size of the selfie camera on the Vivo X100 Ultra, which is ridiculous. But that said, I didn't hate the photos that came out of the S9. Its HDR and color processing woes can be found in images for sure, and there's a serious limit to the amount you can actually capture when you're stuck with a 12 megapixel 1x camera. But by and large, the S9 is still fairly capable, and I'm sure people have figured out how to get custom software on here to run sort of Google's HDR+ camera for capturing more dynamic range. I didn't realize just how many photos I shot at sort of 3, 6 and 10 times until I picked up the S9 to use it for a little bit. Like, I might use the 3 times on my OnePlus more than the 1 times, like all the time. It's kind of crazy. But mainly because the quality doesn't majorly drop off on the OnePlus 12, but on here it's just so obvious once you go beyond sort of 1.5 times, to be honest. The S9 can shoot Ultra HD 4K video up to 60 FPS for up to 5 minutes, and this is maybe where the camera falls more compared to the stills. Video processing in 2018 really wasn't all that advanced, from the dynamic range to the stabilization to the way the exposure and focus transition from different regions. It's just not crazy capable, though it was one of the better setups you could get at the time. I also initially wasn't sold on the tall aspect ratio and the rounded corners of the display, and I made a video on this, which looking back was kind of stupid, but I guess we have to start somewhere, don't we? Fast forward to 2024, and pretty much every phone has curved rounded corners and a long form factor, so I really did kick up a fuss for nothing. Samsung had really kicked up a gear in quality going to the S10 series, so you know what, maybe the S9 wasn't the perfect Samsung, but it served as a bit of a sweet spot for people who didn't want a punch hole getting in the way, wanted a proper reliable fingerprint reader on the big model, the headphone port, the microSD card expansion, and just a simpler phone. No crazy AI stuff. My goodness, I am sick of talking about AI. Honestly, friggin' AI everywhere. Can we just go back to this era, please? Like when companies weren't scared to put in new and interesting hardware features in their phones, when AI hadn't properly come into form yet, when tech was just getting better every single year without fail, and when my £700 plus phone came with a bloody charger in the box. I mean, come on, we are getting absolutely rinsed these days. I might also be getting a little bit jaded with the whole thing. The Samsung Galaxy S9 is by no means a perfect smartphone, but it represents an era of almost perfect balance, when companies were bold enough to try new things, but sensible enough to leave in features that people actually cared about.